Wyoming Territory, 1878. The vast expanse of golden prairie stretched toward distant mountains like an ocean frozen in amber. In this unforgiving landscape, Garrett O'Connor had built something from nothing, a modest cattle ranch carved from wilderness with nothing but determination and calloused hands. At 25, his eyes carried wisdom beyond his years, though his clean-shaven face and the occasional dimpled smile revealed youth not yet hardened by frontier life. Garrett believed the frontier demanded solitude. After losing his parents to fever 3 years prior, he'd convinced himself that attachments were dangerous liabilities. A man stands stronger alone, he'd tell himself while working from dawn till dusk. The ranch Wild Sage was his singular purpose, his refuge from the pain of loss. Love was a luxury for settled towns back east, not for men scratching survival from Wyoming soil. What Wild Sage needed was practical help, not emotional entanglements. Which is precisely why he'd placed the advertisement in the Cheyenne newspaper for a housekeeper, someone to cook, clean, and keep things orderly while he focused on building his herd. Someone who wouldn't complicate matters with sentiment. The stage from Laramie arrived in a cloud of dust that Tuesday afternoon, and with it came his response to that advertisement, though nothing like what he'd expected. Emma Grayson stepped down from the coach, 22 years old and startlingly out of place. Her chestnut brown hair was pulled into a neat bun, though errant strands escaped to frame a face with determined green eyes and a stubborn chin. Her traveling dress of practical navy blue cotton showed signs of the long journey, but she carried herself with unmistakable dignity. One gloved hand clutched a worn carpet bag, the other held a letter, his letter of employment. "Mr. O'Connor," she asked, voice steady despite obvious exhaustion. Garrett nodded, suddenly uncomfortable. She was far too young, far too pretty for what he had in mind. He'd imagined someone older, matronly. Not this girl barely out of her youth with intelligent eyes that seemed to see right through him. "Miss Grayson," he acknowledged. "I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding." Emma's chin lifted slightly. "No misunderstanding, sir. You advertised for a housekeeper. I have experience running a household, cooking, preserving, mending, all the skills your advertisement requested." She extended his letter. "You offered the position to me." "I expected someone," he began. "Older." A hint of challenge flickered in her eyes. "Less female, I assure you, Mr. O'Connor, my capabilities exceed my appearance. I've traveled nearly 2,000 miles to accept this position, and I intend to prove my worth." What Garrett couldn't know was that Emma harbored her own protective beliefs. After losing her family's Boston home to creditors following her father's death, she'd learned that independence was the only security a woman could truly count on. Marriage was a trap that left women vulnerable when tragedy struck. The West represented opportunity, a place where she might earn her own way without depending on anyone else's charity or promises. She needed this job. She needed the fresh start it represented, far from Boston's painful memories and the unwanted advances of her father's business partner who'd offered marriage as the solution to her financial ruin. Garrett studied her for a long moment. Turning her away meant sending her back on the next stage with nowhere to go. Something in her determined stance told him she wouldn't accept charity, and something in her eyes, a familiar loneliness, struck an unexpected chord. "The ranch is no place for a lady," he said finally. "It's rough living, isolated. The nearest town is 2 hours' ride." "I didn't come west expecting parlors and tea parties," she replied. "I came for honest work and a new beginning." Reluctantly, Garrett nodded. 2 weeks' trial. "If either of us finds the arrangement unsuitable, we part ways. Fair enough." Emma extended her hand, an uncommonly forward gesture that surprised him. "Agreed, Mr. O'Connor." He took her hand briefly, noting both its delicacy and surprising firmness. "Garrett," he corrected. "Out here, formality seems foolish when it's just us and the cattle." The journey to Wild Sage Ranch revealed the vastness of Garrett's ambition. The modest but well-constructed cabin stood on a gentle rise overlooking grasslands where cattle grazed. A barn, corral, and several outbuildings completed the homestead, all built by his hands over the past 3 years. "It's not much," he admitted as he helped her down from the wagon, "but it's mine." Emma surveyed her new home with careful neutrality, though privately she admired the orderly functionality of the place. "It has potential," she said diplomatically. The interior of the cabin told a different story than its solid exterior. Bachelor living had left its mark in scattered belongings, neglected corners, and the sparse functionality of a man who saw cooking as mere sustenance rather than comfort. "I'll need supplies," she announced after a brief inspection. "Proper foodstuffs, fabric for curtains, and several household necessities." Garrett raised an eyebrow. "Curtains? A home should be more than shelter, Mr. O'Connor." "Garrett," she corrected herself. "It should provide comfort after a long day's work." "Comfort is a luxury out here." Emma met his gaze steadily. "No, it's a necessity for the spirit. Just as important as food and water." Her words unsettled him, challenging beliefs he'd carefully constructed. "We'll ride to town on Saturday for supplies," he conceded, then retreated to the barn, uncomfortable with how easily she'd claimed space in his carefully isolated life. That first week established their routine. Emma rose before dawn to prepare breakfast and send Garrett off to his work with the cattle. She attacked years of bachelor neglect with systematic determination, transforming the cabin hour by hour. She discovered Garrett's mother's china carefully packed away in a trunk, placing it proudly on shelves she dusted and lined with paper. Garrett returned each evening to find another corner of his home transformed. The smell of real cooking, not just beans and bacon, but proper meals with bread still warm from the oven, filled the cabin. At first he ate in uncomfortable silence, unused to company, but gradually Emma drew him into conversation. "How did you learn ranching?" she asked on the third evening. "My father. We came west when I was 15. Built this place together." "And your mother?" His jaw tightened. "Lost her to fever 3 winters ago. Father followed within a month." Emma nodded, understanding loss. "My father died last year. Creditors took everything else." The simple exchange created the first fragile bridge between them, shared understanding of grief and starting over. By Saturday's trip to town, Garrett found himself watching Emma with growing curiosity. She approached every task with quiet competence, never complaining about the primitive conditions or demanding accommodations. When she spoke of her plans for improvements, she framed them practically, not as comfort she wanted, but as efficiencies the ranch needed. Sweetwater was barely a town, a general store, saloon, smithy, and handful of buildings straddling the stage route. Emma drew curious stares as Garrett helped her down from the wagon. A young, unmarried woman was rare enough on the frontier, but one with Emma's natural grace and beauty created immediate speculation. "Garrett O'Connor, finally brought yourself a wife," called Frank Miller, the storekeeper, as they entered. Emma stiffened beside him, but Garrett quickly corrected the assumption. "Miss Grayson is my housekeeper, Frank. We need supplies." Frank's wife Martha appeared from behind a stack of dry goods, her eyes appraising Emma with frank curiosity. A housekeeper, living unchaperoned with a single man, how progressive. Emma met the woman's gaze with cool dignity. "Where I come from, Mrs. Miller, honest work is never improper. Mr. O'Connor has been a perfect gentleman." While Emma selected household supplies, Garrett overheard whispered conversations. The community's judgment was swift and predictable. A young, unmarried woman living alone with a bachelor would invite scandal, regardless of the employment arrangement. Sheriff Tom Davis confirmed his concerns while Emma was occupied with Martha. "Boy, you're asking for trouble," he warned quietly. "Folk will talk, might be hard on the lady." "It's a business arrangement," Garrett insisted. "Don't matter out here, you know that. Either marry her proper, or find yourself a widow woman for housekeeping." The ride back to Wild Sage was tense, the wagon loaded with supplies and unspoken concerns. Finally, Garrett broke the silence. "Towns got a way of making simple things complicated." "I noticed," Emma replied. "Does their opinion matter to you?" The question caught him off guard. "Not particularly," he said after consideration, "but it might to you. I didn't consider how this arrangement would look to others." "I didn't travel 2,000 miles to worry about gossip," Emma said firmly, "unless you're concerned for your reputation." Garrett couldn't help a short laugh. "I've never courted popularity." They crested the rise overlooking the ranch, bathed in late afternoon sunlight. For the first time, Garrett saw it through fresh eyes, not just as his burden and obligation, but as something he'd created, something with potential beyond mere survival. "It's beautiful," Emma said softly beside him, as if reading his thoughts. This land, what you've built here. Something shifted between them in that moment, a recognition that despite their careful defenses, they were beginning to see each other as more than convenient arrangements. The following weeks fell into natural rhythm. Emma's presence transformed the ranch from mere shelter to home. Curtains appeared at windows, flowers from the prairie arranged on the table, the smell of bread and stew replacing the utilitarian meals of Garrett's bachelor days. More significant were the changes in Garrett himself. He began lingering after dinner, sharing stories of his day, listening to Emma's plans for a vegetable garden. He found himself hurrying to finish chores, looking forward to returning to the cabin's warm light. The hollow isolation that had defined his existence since his parents' deaths began to fill with something he was afraid to name. For Emma, the ranch represented the independence she craved. Here, her work had visible purpose. She wasn't an object of pity or a potential wife to solve financial problems. She earned her place through capability, and Garrett's growing respect meant more than she wanted to admit. One evening, as summer drifted toward autumn, Emma was hanging laundry when she spotted riders approaching, 3 men, moving with purpose toward the ranch. She shaded her eyes, watching as Garrett rode out to meet them from the south pasture. The conversation appeared tense even from a distance. Garrett's posture was rigid, the strangers gesturing emphatically. When they finally rode away, Garrett remained watching them until they disappeared over the horizon. He returned to the cabin distracted, answering Emma's questions with unusual brevity. Only after dinner, as they sat on the porch watching darkness claim the prairie, did he explain. Barstow and his men. They've been buying up small ranches around here, sometimes through means that don't bear close examination. He made an offer for wild sage today. You're not considering selling? Emma asked, alarmed at the possibility. Garrett stared into the gathering darkness. No, but Barstow isn't used to hearing no. His cattle have been found grazing on other ranchers' land, water sources mysteriously damaged. Accidents happening. He's threatening you. Not directly, but the message was clear. Emma's hands tightened in her lap. What will you do? The only thing I can do, hold my ground. This ranch is all I have, all that's left of my family. He glanced at her, his expression softening. I should never have brought you into this. It might get dangerous. I'm not afraid, Emma said, realizing she meant it. The prospect of danger didn't frighten her nearly as much as the idea of leaving wild sage and Garrett. The incident with Barstow's men changed something fundamental. Their careful employer-employee distance blurred as they began working as partners against potential threats. Garrett taught Emma to handle his Winchester rifle. She helped him repair fences and move cattle to safer grazing land farther from Barstow's property. Working side by side, sharing concerns and small victories, they revealed more of themselves than either had intended. Emma spoke of her father's death, the humiliation of poverty, and her decision to seek independence rather than accept a loveless marriage proposal. Garrett described building the ranch with his father, the devastating loss of both parents, and his determination to honor their memory by making wild sage thrive. Neither admitted what was becoming increasingly evident, that their arrangement had evolved into something neither had planned for. The crisis came suddenly on a crisp October morning. Emma was alone at the ranch while Garrett delivered cattle to the railroad at Sweetwater. The sound of approaching horses drew her to the window, where she spotted 3 riders, Barstow's men, not Garrett. She reached for the Winchester, checking it was loaded as Garrett had taught her. When the men dismounted, she opened the door but remained in the threshold, rifle visible but not aimed. Mr. O'Connor isn't here, she called. I expect him back shortly. The lead man, Vince Harper, Barstow's foreman, smiled unpleasantly. That's just fine, ma'am. Our business today is checking property boundaries. Mr. Barstow believes O'Connor's east fence cuts across Bar B land. Mr. O'Connor's survey papers are properly filed with the territorial office, Emma replied evenly. Any boundary disputes should be addressed there. Harper's smile vanished. We're addressing it here and now. You just stay inside, lady. This doesn't concern you. Emma stepped fully onto the porch, rifle now clearly displayed. As Mr. O'Connor's representative in his absence, it very much concerns me. I must ask you to leave until he returns. The men exchanged glances. They hadn't expected resistance, certainly not from a woman. After a tense moment, Harper shrugged. Have it your way. Tell O'Connor we'll be back with Mr. Barstow himself. He'll want to discuss that water rights issue personally." After they departed, Emma's hands trembled with delayed reaction. The confrontation confirmed what Garrett had feared. Barstow wouldn't be deterred easily. When Garrett returned and heard what happened, his face went pale with anger. "You could have been hurt," he said harshly. "These men aren't gentlemen playing by rules." "What should I have done? Let them trespass? Claim your land while you were away?" Emma challenged. "You should have." He stopped, running a hand through his hair in frustration. "I don't know." "Not risked yourself." "This is my home too," Emma said quietly. The simple statement hung between them, acknowledging what neither had put into words. Somehow, in the weeks since her arrival, Wild Sage had become her home as much as his. The realization shifted everything. Garrett moved closer, his anger replaced by something more vulnerable. "Emma," he began, then fell silent, struggling with words. She looked up at him, suddenly aware of how close they stood, how the afternoon light caught in his eyes. For a moment, the careful distance they'd maintained collapsed. He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face with gentle fingers. The touch held promise and question both. Emma found herself leaning toward him, her heart racing with recognition of what had been building between them for weeks. The moment shattered at the sound of approaching horses. They stepped apart quickly as Sheriff Davis rode into the yard, accompanied by Frank Miller from the general store. "Garrett, got word Barstow's men were out this way," the sheriff called. "Everything all right?" Emma retreated inside while Garrett spoke with the men. Through the window, she watched him gesturing toward the east boundary, his expression serious. The interrupted moment left her confused and shaken. What was happening between them threatened the independence she'd fought for, yet the thought of maintaining their careful distance suddenly felt like greater loss. That evening, neither mentioned the almost kiss. Their conversation focused entirely on practical matters, reinforcing fences, scheduling night watches, preparing for Barstow's next move. But something had fundamentally changed. The tension between them had transformed from cautious distance to electric awareness. 2 days later, a letter arrived that forced all other concerns aside. Emma received it with trembling hands, the Boston postmark unmistakable, the handwriting her cousin Susan's. Inside was devastating news. Her father's former business partner, James Whitfield, was pursuing legal action against her, claiming she'd taken family heirlooms that were rightfully part of the business assets. It was a false claim, but fighting it would require returning to Boston immediately. "He's doing this because I refused his proposal," she told Garrett that evening, letter crumpled in her fist. "He said if I wouldn't marry him, he'd see I had nothing at all." Garrett's expression darkened. "You have to go back. If I don't appear in court, I'll lose by default. He'll send authorities to collect what he claims is his property." She looked around the cabin at her mother's locket displayed on the dresser, her grandmother's quilts on the bed, the few precious connections to her past she'd managed to keep. "When would you return?" Garrett asked, voice carefully neutral. The question hung between them. They both knew what he was really asking. If she left now, with Barstow threatening the ranch and their feelings for each other still undefined, would she come back at all? "I don't know," she answered honestly. "These legal matters can take months." That night, Emma lay awake thinking about the choice before her. Boston represented her past, painful memories, but also the familiar world she understood. Wild Sage offered a future she'd never imagined, one filled with hard work and uncertainty, but also with purpose and the growing possibility of love. Love, the word she'd been avoiding, confronted her in the darkness. She'd come west to escape dependency, to build self-sufficiency. Instead, she'd found herself caring deeply for a man who was fighting his own battle against vulnerability. The stage would leave Sweetwater in 2 days. She had until then to decide. Morning brought a decision, though not the one she'd expected to make. As she prepared breakfast, Emma realized she couldn't leave Garrett to face Barstow alone. The legal battle in Boston would have to wait, at least until the immediate threat passed. She would write to cousin Susan and ask her to represent Emma's interests temporarily. When she told Garrett of her decision, relief flooded his features before he could mask it. "Are you certain?" he asked. "Your family heirlooms." "They're just things," she replied, surprising herself with the truth of it. "Important things, yes, but not worth abandoning." She hesitated. "Not worth abandoning Wild Sage when it's under threat." That afternoon, while Garrett checked cattle in the north pasture, riders approached from the east. Not Barstow's men this time, but a woman in a smart traveling outfit, accompanied by a well-dressed gentleman. Emma watched in confusion as they dismounted and approached the cabin. "I'm looking for Emma Grayson," the woman announced. Her refined accent and expensive clothing marked her as Eastern, completely out of place at Wild Sage. "I'm Emma Grayson," she acknowledged cautiously. The woman's critical gaze took in Emma's simple work dress and the modest cabin behind her. "I am Eugenia Whitfield. James is my brother." Emma felt as if the ground had shifted beneath her feet. "Mrs. Whitfield, you're a long way from Boston." "Indeed, when James informed me of your situation, I insisted on coming personally." She gestured to her companion. "This is Mr. Harrington, our family attorney. We've come to resolve this unfortunate matter without public scandal." Emma lifted her chin. "There's no scandal to resolve, Mrs. Whitfield. Your brother's claims are false." "Perhaps," the woman conceded with surprising candor, "but false claims can still ruin reputations, particularly for a young woman living unchaperoned with a bachelor in the wilderness." The threat was clear. Before Emma could respond, the sound of hoofbeats announced Garrett's return. He approached warily, taking in the visitors and Emma's tense posture. "Mr. O'Connor," Emma said formally, "may I present Mrs. Whitfield and Mr. Harrington from Boston." Understanding dawned in his eyes as he dismounted. "What brings Boston lawyers to Wyoming?" he asked directly. "Mr. Harrington cleared his throat. "A simple legal matter concerning Miss Grayson's property." "If we might speak privately." "Anything concerning Miss Grayson can be said in my presence," Garrett interrupted, moving to stand beside Emma. The gesture was protective without being possessive, and Emma felt a surge of gratitude. "Mrs. Whitfield's eyebrows rose fractionally at their obvious alliance. "Very well, my brother has authorized me to offer a compromise. If Miss Grayson returns to Boston immediately, the legal action will be withdrawn. James is prepared to be generous in settling any remaining financial matters." "Generous?" Emma couldn't contain her bitter laugh. "He's using legal threats to force my return because I refused to marry him." "There's nothing generous about that." "My brother believed you two had an understanding," Mrs. Whitfield said stiffly. "Your sudden departure for the frontier struck him as impulsive." "We had no understanding," Emma replied firmly. "I made that clear before I left." Garrett stepped forward. "It seems to me, Mrs. Whitfield, that you've traveled a very long way to deliver a message that could have been sent by post. What's your real purpose here?" The woman's composure slipped momentarily, revealing calculation behind the polite exterior. "To see for myself what could possibly induce a well-bred Boston girl to abandon civilization for," she gestured dismissively at the ranch, "this primitive existence. Now I understand. You've traded one marriage prospect for another, more rugged version." Emma felt heat rise to her face, but Garrett spoke before she could form a response. "Miss Grayson came west for honest work and independence, not marriage prospects," he said evenly. "She's earned respect here through her own merit. If your brother can't accept her decision, that's his shortcoming, not hers." Mrs. Whitfield studied Garrett with new interest. "You speak quite passionately for an employer, Mr. O'Connor." "I speak as someone who values truth and fairness," he replied. "Your brother's tactics are neither." A tense silence followed, broken finally by Mr. Harrington. "Mrs. Whitfield, perhaps we should retire to Sweetwater and continue this discussion tomorrow when tempers have cooled." The woman nodded reluctantly. "We'll expect you in town tomorrow, Miss Grayson, 2 o'clock at the hotel. We depart for the east the following morning, with or without you." After they'd gone, Emma sank onto the porch steps, overwhelmed by the confrontation. "I never thought they'd come all this way. James must be truly desperate to force my return." Garrett sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. "What will you do?" "Meet with them, refuse their terms." "But eventually," she sighed, "eventually I'll have to return to Boston and fight this properly. I can't hide in Wyoming forever while James tries to steal what little I have left of my family." "Is that what you've been doing?" Hiding, there was no accusation in his voice, only gentle inquiry. Emma considered the question honestly. At first, perhaps, running from unwanted proposals, from pity, from being the poor relation everyone whispered about. She looked out over the prairie, golden in the late afternoon light. But then I found purpose here. This place became more than refuge, it became home. Because of the ranch? Garrett asked quietly. Emma turned to him, understanding the real question. Not just the ranch. His eyes held hers, searching for certainty. I never planned for this, he admitted. When you stepped off that stage, I saw complications, not possibilities. And now? Now I can't imagine Wild Sage without you. He took her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against hers. I built this place thinking it was enough, that independence meant standing alone. You showed me what was missing. Emma felt tears threatening. I came west believing attachment was weakness. That depending on anyone would leave me vulnerable again. And now? He echoed her question. Now I understand true partnership isn't dependency. It's building something stronger together than either could create alone. The revelation hung between them, hard-won wisdom from two people who'd learned through loss to guard their hearts. Garrett lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss against her fingers with such tenderness that Emma felt the last of her carefully constructed defenses crumble. Whatever you decide about Boston, he said, know that you'll always have a place here. Not just as my housekeeper, as my partner in every way. The unspoken question in his words was clear. Emma found herself trembling not with uncertainty, but with the magnitude of the choice before her, a choice between the past she needed to resolve and the future she desperately wanted. I have to face James and end his threats, she said finally, but when that's done, she took a deep breath, when that's done I want to come home to Wild Sage, to you. Garrett's smile transformed his face, erasing the worry lines that had become so familiar. He leaned forward, hesitating just a moment before bringing his lips to hers in a kiss that promised everything they'd both been afraid to want. The sound of approaching riders shattered the moment. They pulled apart to see a group of men approaching, Barstow himself at the lead, flanked by his foreman and 4 ranch hands, all armed. Seems we're popular today, Garrett said grimly, standing and positioning himself slightly in front of Emma. Emma moved to his side instead, refusing the protection. We face this together. Barstow was a large man with cold eyes, and the demeanor of someone accustomed to getting his way. He reined in his horse and surveyed the ranch with proprietary interest. O'Connor, he acknowledged, been trying to have a civilized conversation with you for weeks. Sending men to threaten my boundaries isn't what I'd call civilized, Garrett replied evenly. Barstow shrugged. Business is business. I need your water rights for my expanding operation. I've made a fair offer, time to accept the inevitable. Wild Sage isn't for sale, not the land, not the water rights, not at any price. The rancher's expression hardened. Don't be foolish, boy, you're standing in the way of progress. One small ranch can't survive against what's coming. The big operations are the future. My future is right here, Garrett stated firmly. This land belonged to my father and his name is on the deed. I mean to honor that. Barstow's gaze shifted to Emma. Maybe your woman here can talk some sense into you. Wouldn't want anything unfortunate to happen to such a pretty little homestead. Frontiers dangerous, fires, accidents. Man needs to think about protecting what's valuable to him. Emma felt Garrett tense beside her, but she placed a restraining hand on his arm. Mr. Barstow, she said clearly, threatening a man's home in front of witnesses shows poor judgment. Sheriff Davis takes a dim view of such tactics. Witnesses, Barstow laughed. I see a squatter too stubborn to recognize reality and his fancy housekeeper. Hardly reliable testimony. And the attorney from Boston, Emma nodded toward the road, where Mrs. Whitfield's carriage had unexpectedly reappeared. Or Mrs. Whitfield, who comes from one of Boston's most prominent families. Would their testimony carry weight? Barstow turned to see the carriage approaching, Harrington and Mrs. Whitfield watching the confrontation with evident interest. His expression flickered with uncertainty. This isn't over, O'Connor, he warned, wheeling his horse around. Think about my offer. Next one won't be so generous. After Barstow and his men departed, Mrs. Whitfield's carriage pulled to a stop. The woman stepped down, surveying the scene with shrewd assessment. It appears we returned at a dramatic moment, she observed. Land disputes seem rather common in your Wyoming. Mrs. Whitfield, Emma acknowledged, puzzled by their return. Was there something else you needed? The woman straightened her gloves. We had nearly reached town when Mr. Harrington reminded me of an overlooked detail. Your grandmother's pearls, they weren't listed in the inventory James provided. Emma frowned, because they were a personal gift from my grandfather on their anniversary. They were never part of the business assets. Precisely what I suspected, Mrs. Whitfield's expression softened slightly. Miss Grayson, I hope you don't think too poorly of me. I came west with certain preconceptions. My brother painted quite a different picture of the situation. What situation is that? Garrett asked. He described a naive young woman who'd been lured west by false promises, who needed rescue from an unfortunate entanglement. Her gaze traveled between Emma and Garrett. I see instead a capable woman who has built something meaningful, and a man who values her for precisely those qualities my brother found threatening. Emma was speechless at this unexpected shift. Mrs. Whitfield continued, addressing her directly. I will not be party to my brother's schemes. Mr. Harrington will prepare documents confirming your ownership of all personal items in question. James will not pursue this matter further. I will see to that personally. Why, Emma managed, why help me against your own brother? Mrs. Whitfield's expression grew distant. 30 years ago, I faced a similar choice. Between family expectations and my own heart, I chose as I was expected to. She looked at the ranch, then at Garrett. It was the greatest mistake of my life. Before Emma could respond, the woman continued briskly. We'll still expect you in Sweetwater tomorrow to sign the necessary papers. After that, your obligations in Boston are concluded. Your future is your own to determine. After the carriage departed, Emma and Garrett stood in stunned silence. The day's events had resolved months of uncertainty in a matter of hours. Did that really happen? Emma asked finally. Garrett laughed, the sound carrying relief and wonder both. Which part? Boston lawyers appearing in Wyoming, Barstow retreating. Or this? He pulled her into his arms, no hesitation this time as he kissed her with all the feeling he'd kept contained for months. When they separated, breathless and smiling, Emma rested her forehead against his. All of it, everything. 2 months ago I stepped off a stage thinking I was starting a job. Instead you found a home, he finished, and I found the piece of myself I didn't know was missing. The future stretched before them, not without challenges, but rich with possibilities neither had dared imagine when building walls around their wounded hearts. Barstow would remain a threat, the ranch would demand endless work, and the frontier would never offer easy comfort. But as they stood together in the golden afternoon light, arms entwined and hearts aligned, Emma and Garrett recognized the truth they'd both been fighting. Real strength wasn't found in isolation, but in the courage to build something together. Love wasn't the vulnerability they'd feared, but the foundation that would help them weather whatever storms approached. Marry me, Garrett said simply. Not because of Barstow or gossip or Boston lawyers. Marry me because Wild Sage needs both of us. Because I love you, Emma Grayson. Emma's answer required no deliberation. Her journey west had begun as escape, transformed into independence, and culminated in the most unexpected discovery. That true freedom came not from avoiding connection, but from finding the right person with whom to build a shared dream. Yes, she whispered against his lips, yes to all of it. 3 weeks later, they stood before Reverend Walsh in Sweetwater's small church, exchanging vows witnessed by ranchers, townsfolk, and even Sheriff Davis, who'd predicted this outcome from the beginning. Emma wore her mother's lace collar on a simple blue dress, wildflowers in her chestnut hair. Garrett, clean-shaven and solemn, spoke his promises in a voice that carried to every corner of the packed room. When the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, the cheers rattled the windows. Martha Miller wiped tears, whispering to her husband that she'd known all along that the housekeeper arrangement would end this way. That evening, returning to Wild Sage's husband and wife, they stood on the porch watching sunset paint the prairie in shades of amber and gold. The cabin glowed with lamplight behind them, transformed by Emma's touch from mere shelter to true home. In the distance, cattle grazed peacefully, Garrett's herd growing steadily despite Barstow's continued threats. "What are you thinking?" Emma asked, noting Garrett's contemplative expression. He smiled, drawing her close against the evening chill. "That my father was right, though not in the way he intended. When we first claimed this land, he said, a man needs 3 things to tame the frontier: strong hands, clear water, and a vision of the future. I always thought the vision was just about cattle and fences. And now I understand it's about building something that outlasts us. A home, a family. He brushed his lips against her temple. Everything I thought I had to face alone is stronger when shared with you. Emma leaned into his embrace, no longer the frightened Boston girl fleeing unwanted proposals, nor the determined woman proving her independence. She had become something more complex, a partner in building a life that honored both strength and tenderness, independence and connection. "We'll face Barstow together," she said, "and whatever else comes. Wild Sage is ours now, our past and our future." As darkness settled over the Wyoming prairie, Emma and Garrett O'Connor stood together on the threshold of their shared life. Two souls who had journeyed through loss and loneliness to discover that love wasn't the luxury they'd believed, but the essential foundation upon which everything meaningful would be built. In the years to come, Wild Sage would weather droughts and blizzards, cattle thieves and market crashes. Barstow would eventually overextend himself and lose his empire to Eastern investors. Children would fill the cabin with laughter, and the cemetery on the hill would gain new markers as life followed its eternal cycle. Through it all, the lesson learned in that golden autumn of 1878 would sustain them. That the frontier's greatest challenge wasn't survival against the elements, but opening one's heart to the possibility that strength came not from standing alone, but from building something enduring together.